I'm greatly honored to be in this building speaking to golf aficionados like yourselves. Some of you I've never met, most of you I've never met, and I'm just impressed that you actually come and see me speak. Okay, I could be in the pub now, but I'm here. As Hannah said, let me give you a little background on myself. Very quickly, I learned to play golf at age 10 on the municipal courses in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my dad played golf, but he did not mentor me. I went out at age 10 with my 10-year-old friends and just started playing golf. And it, I was never great. In fact, I'm still not. In fact, I was probably better at 10 than I am now. But it's been, what is that, 65 years, almost 66 years that I've been playing golf. And I haven't gotten any better. But where everything changed was in 1971. And I wound up doing some postgraduate work at Dundee University. And I came over, and the first little anecdote I'll tell you is that within the first 3 or 4 days, I wound up coming down to St. Andrews with a couple of the lads that I lived with in one of the university buildings. And we said, Saturday, let's go down to St. Andrews, go to their union, and see if we can meet some girls. So prior to that, I had one bit of knowledge, and that was that St. Andrews was the home of golf. Okay, that didn't really tip the scales. I also saw the 1971 Walker Cup on TV, and I saw Lanny Watkins playing on the road hole. And I said, ooh, that's pretty cool. Now, I still had not connected the dots that I was going to be 12 miles away in Dundee, and I could have come down to St. Andrews. It still hadn't worked out. But that day, Dave Harrison, who had the car, drove me around as we were leaving town and showed me the golf course. And that piqued my interest. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks. I was a dedicated beer drinker. I drank brown ale. There were only 2 places in Dundee that sold it. One was the little licensed grocery up on the Prince's Road. And I'd go in there on Wednesday afternoon, which was sports day, and I'd get 2 carrier bags of cans, take them back to my room. That was a week's supply. And after about 3 weeks, the gentleman that ran the establishment said to me, "So you're an American?" I said, "Well, yeah. What gave you that? What gave it away?" And in true Scots fashion, and this is something that I love and I'll take to my grave, he says to me, "Well, have you played any of the great golf courses we have over here?" And I said, "I didn't bring my clubs, but I brought my glove." And he says, "You tell me when you're ready to play golf, I will fix you up with a kit." Didn't know my name. He knew I was a student. Of course, I had to register with the police to be a student here, a foreign student. And he just knew I was a university student. But here he is, ready to facilitate my playing golf up here. And I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. So that's my introduction. I started playing the old course. I tell people I should have played a lot more than I did. I'm kicking myself in the butt for not playing more, because in 1971, it cost £1. And locals, there were 3 tee times per hour that were open for locals. And if no resident showed up, they'd take the next person that was waiting. And so I never waited more than 20 minutes to play the old course. And I played the Jubilee, and I played the Eden, and the old Jubilee before they redid it, and the Eden. And I got up to Rosemount, and I played the Carnoustie and did the whole thing. Now, that year changed my life. I went back home, continued working on postgraduate degrees, got married, brought my wife over here on honeymoon. We got off the train. The little licensed grocer was there in his car to ferry us around. Our first stop was the woolen mill. Because it was so darn cold, we needed sweaters.
Well, Wisconsin's cold. Wisconsin's cold.
It certainly is. And I can tell you stories about being out in 20 below, okay? But we traveled light, you know, and we came up from the smoke, and it was a little warmer down there. Anyway, and that gentleman that night, through the train window, because we took the sleeper back down home, we came for a day, essentially, handed me a wood-shafted putter as a gift to take home. It was a Braid Mills model 1915. I'd never seen anything like that before. Of course, it's common as all get out when you're a collector. I still have that club. And that started the love of old golf clubs. And I was living in Chicago, started going out, hitting the thrift stores, hitting the Salvation Army, hitting the junk shops, and collecting. And pretty soon, as a young newlywed, in a one-bedroom flat on the 46th floor of a high-rise in downtown Chicago, I had 150 wood shaft golf clubs in my bedroom. Okay. All downhill from there. I got one of the shops that I went to. They gave me a copy of an article that was in one of the antique newspapers, and it was the Golf Collectors Society. And I said, I'll join. And I did. And that's when I started connecting the dots. I had 150 golf clubs in my bedroom, and I had people that could start telling me about them. Now, I'll cut the biography short by saying I came back one year with my wife, maybe 3 or 4 years later. In the time that I had come down from Dundee on the old Alexander's bus to play golf here, I had made a friend out of Eric Ochterlony. And I'd met Laurie too. And I'm not afraid to say that Laurie was a horse's ass. Sorry, but he was. He looked down on me. You know, I was just a dumbass student. Eric was a very friendly guy, very personal guy. And he was the impetus for me to start doing research and trying to learn. And I would write him letters, and he would write back and say, yeah, that's Jimmy Sherlock, you know, or that's so-and-so, or that's so-and-so. And right before he passed away, and the Compendium of British Clubmakers has Eric's foreword. Eric wrote the foreword to that book for me. Right before he passed away, he said to me, I love you because you used to come to me for information, and now I come to you for the answers. So, that's part of my love of St. Andrews and the golfing community here and the history of the sport. I knew nothing about Tom Morris till I wound up going to Dundee. And maybe it has bitten you like it's bitten me, but boy, I live and breathe golf history, and I love it. Okay, is that enough? Good. All right. Okay. I've given you the crib sheet, okay? And it has everything that's going to be on the slides. But I didn't think you wanted to take notes, and you can kind of follow along. And you can see all the lineage on here. If we want to do it all, we'll be here till 10 o'clock, okay? So I'm really going to hit the high spots, and you can ask questions as you see fit, okay? Probably best to wait till I finish. My start is Scotland's Gift, Golf. You've probably seen the book or know of the book. It was written by C.B. Macdonald, and that was his thing. And we'll talk about him in a minute. Now, my version of Scotland's Gift is the Scots, bless them, have given us 3 fantastic gifts. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, go ahead. We'll catch up. They are whiskey, plaid, and golf. Okay, go back one slide real quick. The brackets are my way of saying I wanted to do 12 important Scottish influences of American golf, to be brief, okay? You're going to hear about 17, not 12. Some of them aren't Scottish, and they're all important. This is my version of who did you send over to give us what we needed to be a great golfing nation. Okay. You can hit it again?
Again?
Yes? All right. I've got 5 different categories. The first one is going to be architects. And these are in alphabetical order, so they're not necessarily one better than the other. But Tom Bendelow from Aberdeen was really the first paid golf architect in America. Yes, certain clubs would invite somebody in, but he actually made a living out of being a golf architect. He figured out how to do it. He was kind of from the old Tom Morris school of a walk around for a day, put some stakes in the ground, here's the tee, here's the green, okay, cut the grass. But he did that over 600 times. And by being so prolific, he called himself the Johnny Appleseed of golf, of American golf. Now, does anybody here know who Johnny Appleseed is? Good, all right. Johnny Appleseed was John Chapman, and he was kind of almost like a mid-19th century hippie. And he just went from town to town planting apple trees and teaching people how to plant apple trees, how to graft them, how to care for them, because he felt that apple trees were the salvation of mankind. And Bendelow had that reputation because of that 600 golf courses that he laid out, probably 550 were munis. And he was on the crest of the wave, the golf fanatic wave in America, where villages and towns and cities wanted to have activities for their residents, and golf was on the forefront. And so you'll go into a lot of small Midwestern towns and you'll find out that their 9-hole course, which has been extended to 18 holes, was actually laid out, the first 9 was laid out by Tom Bendelow. Okay, 600 courses. He did do Medina number 3, which I have played. I shot a 73 at Medina, 50 on the front 9, 73 on the back. It was in the U.S. Open setup. I can't tell you what it's like to hit out a 6-inch rough, 6-inch fescue, but it's a magnificent course. All right, next slide, Hannah. Okay, and we're up to Willie Davis. Okay, now, Willie Davis, born Carnoustie, all right. There's not a lot we know about Willie Davis, but what we do know is interesting, because he actually came over about 1880 at a request from Royal Montreal, and somehow helped them lay out one of their early courses, and then got contacted by U.S. factions and came down and laid out Newport and Shinnecock Hills, and then kind of disappeared. He did play in the first U.S. championship. We don't call it the Open because there were only 4 players, 3 of them named Willie, and the other was named Sam. Anyway, but that's important because both Newport and Shinnecock obviously became founding members of the USGA. All right, what's next? Alister Mackenzie. Alister is one of those architects that has a golden name. Everybody in America knows Alister. Now, Alister was born in Yorkshire, but as you can see from my notes, the Mackenzie family had royally granted lands. I've forgotten what county in Scotland. Ancestral lands. It was in the Highlands somewhere. So he is a Scotsman, and of course, his claim to fame is Augusta National. But he's got a number of other really top flight courses, like the Ohio State University. I got my hat. I should have put my hat on. Yeah, but that's that O, yeah. Scarlet course in Columbus, Ohio. And of course, Alister also did Pasatiempo, which is kind of like the public course. It's a public course in California, and it still costs over $200 to play because it's so popular. It's a magnificent layout, and he lived in a house on the edge of that course. All right, number 4. Hannah? Willie Park Jr. Now, Willie had kind of a checkered career after winning 2 Opens. He had come over in 1895, and this is what I found incredible. He came over, I think he was, that's right, somehow on his 1895 tour, he was introduced to Rockefeller, John Jacob Astor. I mean, these guys were the original billionaires, the original robber barons in America. So he had somehow ingratiated himself into literally American royalty. And all these guys were interested in promoting the sport. Rockefeller was playing up until he was like 100. And he was at in Virginia. And I was talking to I'm trying to think of the name of the resort. I talked to the curator there, the historian, and they claim that Old Woolla, W-U-L-L-A, Old Woolla Park was their first professional. Now, it wasn't old, it was young. It was young Willie, and he was only there 3 weeks, okay? But they want to take credit. They want to take credit for having Willie Park as their first pro. He did come back in 1916. Well, he came back a couple of times, but he came back in 1916 to stay. And I think he was trying to avoid the war. In the war, in Europe, just because there's probably no business there for golf architects at the time. Set up an office and did a whole bunch of courses in the United States and Canada. And then finally, in about 1923, in ill health, went back to Scotland. So, again, some of the great courses in America came from the hand of Willie Park Jr. A number of them were open courses. All right, last architect. Donald Ross. Now, if Alistair Mackenzie has a rival in golf architecture, it's Donald Ross. Okay? Donald Ross also has a name that's etched in gold. And like Tom Bendelow, Donald Ross devotees claim that he either designed, improved, or worked on over 600 courses during his lifetime. Now, his claim to fame was that he came to Boston initially, and one of the members at the country club in Boston introduced him to the Tufts family. And the Tufts family made their fortune in the soda fountain business. And you know the old soda fountains where they had handles and made a malted milk for you or a ice cream soda or whatever. And they devised soda fountain equipment and made their money and would winter in Florida. And on the train, going halfway down, they'd stop in North Carolina for a couple of days. And they liked it so much that they bought land and created Pinehurst. And the Tufts family still owns a whole lot of real estate in that county in North Carolina. But Ross was there from 1900 or 1901 till he died in 1947. And there's an interesting story, and some of you probably have heard this before. If you know Bob Hansen and familiar with Bob, Bob eventually moved to Pinehurst. And when he got there, the house for sale was Donald Ross's house, Dornoch Cottage. And Bob bought it and restored it, did a nice job. And the story on that is that Donald met a widow and befriended her and romanced her and married her, and she owned that house. And it's on the third hole of number 2 course. And that's how he got that house, was he married into it. And Bob is very kind. He always lets, when it opens there, he always lets me park in his driveway so I don't have to come in from the hinterland. Once again, 600 courses, and his reputation, as you can see down there, has created a society, the Donald Ross Society. And there are a whole bunch of other societies out there. There's James Braid Society and a number of others. But this is a big group, and there are hundreds and hundreds of members of the Donald Ross Society, and they go out and play different Ross courses, and they'll tell you which ones are really good, and they'll tell you which ones are really below par for Donald Ross. And there are a lot of them that are attributed to, but they have no historical background. And there are others that he may have gone in and tinkered with 2 holes, but they want to be known as a Donald Ross course. So there's a lot of smoke with that, okay? There's a guy named Chris Spence in Greensboro, North Carolina, that does one thing. He specializes in restoring Ross courses to what he claims are their former glory, okay? So how do you know? And of course, then there's also the Tufts Archives. And the Tufts Archives is in the library building in Pinehurst. And it is a fabulous collection of original Donald Ross course plans, hand-drawn course plans. And it's got a lot of other things in there too, and including some old soda fountains and that sort of thing. But if you ever get to Pinehurst, do not leave without going to the Tufts Archives. Okay, so that's 5 architects. That's a pretty good number. Now, going on, we're going to go to club makers. This is my alley. I like club makers. Willie Dunn. I don't think the Dunn family needs any introduction to you. Willie was born in London when his father was at Royal Blackheath, and but he is a Scotsman, so we give him that. And what really drove American golf manufacture was obviously the popularity of the game, but 3 different companies hired Willie Dunn to get their golf manufacturing business cranked up. Spalding was already making clubs, but Dunn got there and really improved what they were making and how they were selling. He also worked at McGregor, and there are certain very old McGregor clubs that have what we call a bow tie mark. It's a circle with wings coming out of it. And the original, the earliest McGregors say Willie Dunn on the top, as well as McGregor. And then he was only there a year, and after he left, they took the Willie Dunn off and just had the regular bow tie mark. And he also was a major factor at the Bridgeport Gun Implement Company, which we call BGI. And that was an American firm that was in all manner of sporting goods. Hunting, shooting, riding, football, everything. And they were a big factor in early American club sales, mostly because of Willie. Now, he did go back to London in the early 1900s, worked at the London Golf Club Company, the British Golf Club Company, and then came back and was active in a lot of different avenues. Part of his success is he brought his nephew over, and that was John Duncan Dunn, and he also brought, I forgot what Seymour's precise relationship was, but Seymour Dunn was up in Lake Placid, New York for years and years and years. And just to divest here a little bit, digress a little bit, my wife and I were sitting in the backyard of a lady's house. Her daughter and my son were chummy, and she was a little bit older than us. The daughter was her 5th child. He was my 1st child. And the lady was telling us that she grew up in LA, and one day when she was very young, her father got in the car with her, drove over the mountain, went to Glendale, and she was going to get golf lessons from the pro there. And she said, yeah, he was an old Scotsman and could barely understand him. His name was John Duncan Dunn. And this was probably 1930, maybe 1926, something like that. And when I heard that, I just about fell off the chair. And he was still, at that age, teaching in California. Anyway, that's the Dunns. You know a bunch about them, I'm sure. Okay, Anna. And also, a St. Andrean, whose name is probably very familiar, Jim Falls. Peter Crabtree corrected me. It wasn't Fallis, it's Falls. And he, when we get down to C.B. Macdonald, he was hired to come over to Chicago and lay out the course for the Chicago Golf Club, which turned out to be the first 18-hole course in America. his father was foreman for Tom Morris, and he was still an amateur, but he came over and laid the course out, became their first professional, and wound up winning the 1996 U.S. Open out at Shinnecock, which really irritated a lot of people because there was a big dichotomy between Eastern golfers and Western golfers. One of my good friends, who's deceased now, he's, oh God, 20, 25 years older than I, told me a story once, and I've not forgotten this. He said that his dad told him, he says, get in the car, we're going to go over, and you're going to shake hands with the U.S. Open champion. And he thought it might have been Hogan or somebody like that. It was Jim Falls Jr., who at that time was probably 90 years old or something like that. And after I heard that, I made a note to self. Every time you're in the company of an Open champion, shake hands. And I collect handshakes of U.S. Open champions. And I'll tell them that. I'll say, I just want the honor of shaking your hand. Okay. I'm sorry, go back. I just want to make sure. Yeah, Tom Morris recommended him to go over to America. And of course, he never went home, stayed there. And his two brothers came over as well. And they were also golf pros, helped lay out courses in St. Louis and some other cities. So that's where the 12 becomes 17. I'm giving you a whole bunch of people that came from Scotland. All right, where am I here? Okay, number 8. Okay, now, these are what I call personages, and they are influencers, like the title of my presentation says. Now, C.B. Macdonald is the only one in this group that was not born in Scotland or England. He was born in Niagara Falls, New York. But as a young man, he was packed off and sent to St. Andrews to go to university. And he used to tell stories about sitting on the steps of the Morris shop and talking to Tom and Tommy, and he was there in 1872, and learning about golf. And he just became totally enamored with the sport and what it was and how much fun it was. And he went back home and did a lot of golf playing and a lot of evangelizing, and eventually did things like founded the Chicago Golf Club. He was living in Chicago at the time. He founded National Links out on Long Island, and he was really the impetus behind the U.S. Amateur Championship. And the first amateur was, of course, the first major that was played in America. It was played the day before the first U.S. Open. And he actually, take that back, he actually got everybody together, the amateurs, and had an amateur championship, and he didn't win. He wanted to win, but he didn't win. So he canceled all that, and when the USGA was founded, and he was one of the founding members, he scheduled another U.S. Amateur Championship, and he won that time, okay? So, but writing books like Scotland's Gift Golf and other books, he was one of those guys that was heart and soul a golfer as long as he lived. All right. Next, please. Robert White. This is an interesting story. One of the first books that I got when I stuck my toe in the water was Sturkin Henderson's book, Golf in the Making. Golf in the Making. And that was as a young golf collector and young member of the Golf Collectors Society, that was my Bible. I mean, I read that book backward and forward and memorized it. And then I later on, started a conversation, correspondence with David Stirk, just asking him more questions. And I think we even published that in Through the Green. I took some of the excerpts of letters that I had gotten from him because I was curious to know whether he had coined a lot of the terms and phrases that we use in the collecting world, like deep groove clubs and the backspin clubs and anti-shank irons, shankless irons.
Long nose?
Long nose too, that's right. And he filled me in on all that stuff. And so, once again, part of my whole lifestyle is capture it and preserve it. Capture it and write. I was fortunate enough to spend an afternoon with Herbert Warren Wind before he fell into dementia. And we'd be telling stories to each other, and I'd tell him stuff like that, and he'd say, "Have you written it down? Write it down. Don't let it get away." And he's right. So, this one, Robert White, in David Stirk's book, he had down as the cleek maker in St. Andrews. Robert White, the cleek maker, who was the mentor of Tom Stewart. And it's not true. This Robert White was a school teacher. Wasn't even in the club making business, as so many of the guys that came over were. They worked at Forgan's or they worked at Simpson's, and then they came over and found a better lifestyle in the United States. So, his claim to fame is that he went from Cincinnati, where he was a pro at Cincinnati Country Club, got a pro's job as a school teacher, and went up to Dayton, which is only about 60 miles away. And there was a company up there called McGregor, Canby, and Crawford, and Canby. The McGregor Golf Company, except that they weren't a golf company. They were a manufacturer of shoe lasts, for putting in your shoes, and hat blocking equipment. And he said, you guys are really good at using copying lathes and turning lathes to do different shapes, different complex shapes. Have you ever thought about making golf clubs? Club heads. And they thought about it and thought about it and thought about it and actually got into the business. And they were exporting rough-turned persimmon driver heads to Scotland before they ever started making golf clubs. And then they figured out that they could make money with golf clubs. Now, the saddest part of McGregor is that in 1933 or 34, they quit making hickory shafts. And they had 400,000 turned hickory shafts in the drying sheds. And they all went to feed the boilers in the factory. Anyway, that Robert White was an impresario, because not only was he early involved in the club making business with PG Manufacturing, which was a co-op. He contacted a whole bunch of different Scottish pros that were in America and had them making clubs, and he'd have them stamped with certain names, and then he was the broker selling those clubs to other club professionals on a wholesale basis. And he had a couple of his own club making concerns over time. And where it really gets going is he goes down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which was probably nothing but a swamp in those days, and got into the real estate business, developed a golf club down there and a couple resorts. And then if that wasn't enough, he was the first president of the PGA of America. Remember, he was a school teacher. He came over and pretended to be a pro. And he was probably a good pro, but that's part of the clue here, is that you had guys coming over, hundreds of them, from this country, and they knew how to play golf, but they could never get into the golf business here because it was so closed. And they wound up going to America, making a lot of money, being very popular, and just as a side, built golf in America. Okay, what else do we have? Willie Anderson. My buddy, I'm the straight man, he's the joker. He walks in and he says, have you ever seen one of these clubs? And it says, Willie Anderson, champion. And I said, yeah, I had one, and I donated it to the USGA Museum. Except mine was left-handed, so we knew Willie Anderson couldn't have used it. But there was a time when, and I was telling him, there was a time when certain champions wanted to capitalize on that and stamp their clubs as champion, okay? Now, Willie Anderson won 4 U.S. Opens, and he's the only golfer to win 3 consecutive. We've had a couple of 2 consecutives, but never a 3. And he won 2 of those at Myopia Hunt, which is one of my favorite courses. And Willie Smith from Carnoustie, who was also a great American champion, in his day said, Willie Anderson was the king. Nobody could beat him. And so, unfortunately, as it's so often happens, it says here, I think, that he died of epilepsy. They think he really drank himself to death. So, all right. Who's next? The Smith brothers. I don't know if you ever had it over here, but we had, as a kid growing up, and even earlier than my childhood, Smith Brothers cough drops. And they came in a little box, and they had a picture of the Smith brothers, bearded, facing each other. So every time I see Smith Brothers of Carnoustie, I think about the cough drops. But Carnoustie has sent a lot of golfers to America, a lot of golf industry people. And the Smiths sent 5 sons over to America to be pros. Willie Smith was the standard bearer, and he won 2 U.S. Opens, 06 and 10. And the 10 was played at the Philadelphia Cricket Club, which is a place that I go frequently, and I love it. And the story is, and the club really didn't even know this, but the story is that that's the first, I think it was the first 3-way playoff in U.S. Open history. And Willie, the 9th hole, the 18th hole, was a 273-yard hole, elevated tee, elevated green, and he was in the lead by 1 stroke in the 1910 U.S. Open. Drove the green 273 yards and 3 putted. And that put him in a 3-way tie with his little brother, Macdonald Smith, and Jerry Travers. And in the playoff, he waxed both of them. And what happened is, being the good brother, the good older brother that he was, he took his younger brother out to dinner and got him stinking drunk. Because he knew he could beat Travers, but he wasn't sure if he could beat his brother. So that's a great story, and if you're a Scotsman, you got to appreciate that. Okay. Harry Varden. Okay, Harry's our Englishman. And he really never spent a whole lot of time over here, but he was very, very influential. He came over in 1900 as hired, I was going to say as a guest of the Spalding Company, no, but they hired him to do a promotional tour. And he actually played 80 matches, exhibition matches, at different courses. And of course, golf in those days was pretty much East Coast and some Midwest. And all, the Spalding promotional machinery got those written up. They were in all the newspapers. People came out to see, the English champion, the British champion. And he won the 1900 U.S. Open. Now, don't know why, but he chose to come back in 1913. And you all know the story of Francis Ouimet and how a young amateur, 21-year-old amateur, won the U.S. Open by beating Harry Varden and Ted Ray in the playoff. That was the shot heard around the world, at least in America. And so those two trips, his tour and the shot heard around the world, created so much groundswell in the golf game, made a lot of money for Spalding, but it really, it got golf into the press, into the big-time press, and really created a big stir. Very important two moments in U.S. golf history. Okay. Teachers. Jimmy Maiden and Stuart Maiden. They did two things. They worked at the same clubs. They worked at the East Lake, of course, and then at Nassau County Club, which is the place where they invented the Nassau bet in golf. You all know the Nassau, right? You don't? No? Okay. Gentleman's bet. The $2 Nassau. Of course, $2 was a lot more money back in the old days. Whoever wins the front nine gets $2. Whoever wins the back nine gets $2, and whoever wins the match gets $2. So the most you could lose was $6. Okay, and that originated at Nassau Golf Club in around Long Island. But they mentored that young upstart named Robert Trent Jones Jr., Robert Tyre Jones Jr., and they also gave him his Calamity Jane putter. That was Jimmy Maiden. Jimmy gave him the putter. And it was a Winton putter, and for some reason it had been stamped Calamity Jane because they said, if you ever have a bad day, just think of Calamity Jane. And the story of that club, and you probably know some of that, is that he used that as a young man, and he won his first couple opens with that club. And by 1926, it had been emeryed so many times that it was starting to lose mass, starting to lose weight. So he sent it to Spalding, and he said, make me exact copies of this club, 12 of them. And they did. And so he had a replica of Calamity Jane for the Grand Slam. From 26 to 30, he used that club. It's hanging in the USGA museum. It's simply stamped Robert T. Jones Jr. And he had 6 of them. He gave the other 6 to friends. We don't know where the 11 of them are, but the first one is in Far Hills, New Jersey. And when I was working on one of my books, I was there in the old building, up in a garret in the attic, and I needed a photograph of Calamity Jane, and I asked them very politely if they would open the glass case in the Bobby Jones room and take it out and let me photograph it. And they did, and they brought it upstairs, and I photographed it. And then my son and I were there, and we each took pictures of each other putting with Calamity Jane. And the only ball that I could find up there in the storage area was an old British ball that still had the paper wrapper on it. And it was a black paper wrapper, so we're putting this black ball. Anyway, but yeah, that's the Maidens. And you know, Calamity Jane is probably the most famous golf club in the United States. It's history. Okay, next, Hannah. Harry Turpey. Harry was a St. Andrean. He worked at Forgan's, and he caddied for Willie Ochterlony in Willie's 1893 Open victory. He eventually came, I don't know how he got here, but he was in Chicago and was at Edgewater Country Club and mentored a young man that lived in the neighborhood who was a caddy. His name was Charles Chick Evans, and he got Chick, a good enough golfer, to win the city championship as a young man after a couple of tries, and progressed on from there. And of course, Chick was the first American to hold the amateur and the open concurrently. And unfortunately, that was 1916, and we quit having opens in 17 and 18, and I think 19. And so that cut his career short. He was amateur champion in 1920, I think, and he was an amateur all his life. Never married, lived with Mom, and when I bought my first house, I was living in Chicago, and my first house was about a block and a half from the Evans residence. Now, Edgewater had ceased to exist at that point, and it was bought by the county, and they took the 18-hole track, took the center 9 holes, and made a 9-hole track out of that, and then put playgrounds and other, recreational stuff, picnic shelters and that sort of thing around the periphery. And when I lived there, my son was a year old, and I had a little seat on the back of my bike where I put him, and we'd ride down to the park. It was called Warren Park, which was the old Edgewater Club, and we'd ride around the golf course before it opened. It was still basically under construction. Go up on some simulated elevated tees and look out, and that was Chick Evans. Now, Turpey had a brother, George, that also came over and was a pro. But teaching Bobby Jones and teaching Chick Evans, how much better can it get than that, So, that is that my presentation? Yep, Harry Turpey. What can I answer for you? And let me tell you, I got heavily interested in this thanks to people like Eric Ochterlony, and I went on a dedicated spree trying to gather as much information as I could especially about club makers and professionals and the Scots, connecting the dots, how they got over here and where they went. And I was fortunate to have done this in the 70s and the 80s, and we won't give anybody any ideas, but I was given carte blanche at the USGA library to just go in and take whatever I wanted to the photocopy machine and do it. And I've got 2 4-drawer file cabinets full of those copies. That's my working library. Golf Magazine, Golfing, all the old annuals. And now it's all under lock and key. You know, I could never do today what I did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that's sad. I mean, they'll answer questions for me, they'll get stuff for me, but it's got to be a rifle shot. I've got to say, hey, I need this from, you know, July 12th, 1897, Golfing Magazine. And that's what happened. That's how I got started. And I also learned how to publish, how to do layout. I sell my stuff through Amazon. They have a small publisher's service where they inventory my books, sell them wholesale or retail, and do a direct deposit into my checking account once a month. It's really cool. I'm still working. I've got probably 3 books in process. I don't have enough time to do them, but I put a little time in. And as I told Hannah and Angela, when you get Alistair Johnston's collection over, you'll have it all. Alistair has the Georgiady shelf in his library. He has got every edition of every book that I've ever put out. Compendium of British Club Makers, 5th edition. Winchester Golf Club Value Guide, 9th edition. Collecting Antique Golf Clubs, 3rd edition. That year in Dundee, as I said, changed my life. I came back. My career was in high tech. I worked for IBM for many years, especially starting when computers ran on 408 volt power and needed a whole room with extra air conditioning and a raised floor for cabling. And I worked for the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation and a couple of other high-tech, Xerox and Ricoh and some other.
Boeing.
Not Boeing. No, not Boeing. Can't blame it on me. Okay. But at night I'd be cranking away on this stuff, and when I think back to how that year in Dundee started me going, and how the Golf Collectors Society introduced me to a lot of other people. I've been on the USGA Museum Committee for 18 years. I've written for the US Open program 8 times. That's more than any other freelance writer has written for the Open. Written the books, a member of the Golf Writers Association. I run a little golf tournament where we play 1890s equipment, 19th century rules, simulated gutta-percha balls in attire, 27 years. You know, none of that would have happened if I hadn't come here. And I can tell you stories about the influence that people here have had on me, golf-wise. While I was a student in class, one of my courses said, the instructor said, the professor said, we're not getting through enough material. We have to schedule another meeting every week. So everybody write down what your best available times are, and we'll do a consensus and we'll schedule it. And it turned out to be Thursday afternoon, which was my golf afternoon. So I went down to his office and I said, hat in hand, you know, Mr. Watson, I want you to know that don't know how to say this, but Thursday afternoon is my golf afternoon. And he was a very dour man and a lovely guy. And his father was manager of the Drummond's Bank at Trafalgar Square. And I went down and they took me up into the boardroom for sherry. And anyway, and he looks at me and I thought he was just going to chew me out. And he says, "Mr. Georgiady, you must do what's right. You play your golf. We'll get you the notes." How much better can it be than that? You know? Exactly.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay. Is it time to drink?
I think it's time to. Thank you very much.
Questions?